What's up, everyone? I'm Tamara Brown with the Draft Network, here to take you through Kyle Crabb's Mock Draft 6.0. Kyle, a lot has changed since your last draft, and a lot of chaos in the free agency, I should say, has happened over the past couple of weeks. We have Fitzpatrick going to the Washington football team, a lot of great additions to the Giants offense, as well as Drew Brees retiring and many other changes happening with the Dolphins offense as well. But with that all taking place, what does your top five currently look like right now as we go into the NFL draft?
So there's an anticipation that we're going to get a big run on quarterbacks in the early portions of this draft. And you see quarterbacks come off with the first three picks in my mock 6.0. And it's crazy to think we've done six of these already. Trevor Lawrence and Zach Wilson going 1 and 2 to Jacksonville and the New York Jets. A big trade with Carolina. There's a lot of buzz and heat around the Carolina Panthers being interested in making a splash for a franchise quarterback. And it looks like the draft is going to be the most realistic option and avenue for them to pursue that as you survey the NFL landscape with things with Sam Darnold, and they see an upgrade over what they have in Teddy Bridgewater and the Deshaun Watson situation. And that's probably going to be status quo and let due process play out there. So the draft, Carolina jumping up with the Miami Dolphins, a team who drafted a quarterback in the top 5 of last year's draft, and Carolina securing Trey Lance, maybe a little bit of a surprise because on my personal big board, it's Justin Fields as QB2, but Fields going to be the 4th quarterback off the board here with Carolina moving up for Trey Lance. Atlanta drafting Kyle Pitts, the tight end from the Florida Gators. And then Cincinnati, another surprise. You talked about how much has changed. It's been offensive line no matter what. Penei Sewell at all costs for Cincinnati. I'm taking Jamar Chase, the wide receiver from LSU.
Now, in your next couple of picks, you do have a lot of shakeups. More importantly, you mentioned Justin Fields. You actually swapped him, and you have him going elsewhere. Where do you see him going for his new home going into this NFL draft?
As much as it's painful to think about another 2-decade run of the New England Patriots, I have the Patriots trading up to 7 with the Detroit Lions. And Detroit is a team that's very clearly interested in building towards the future with the Matt Stafford trade and returning a bunch of future draft assets in order to get that trade done with the Los Angeles Rams. An opportunity here for Detroit to move back, understanding this is not going to be a competitive year for us. Let's take advantage. Let's hoard picks in years in which the draft process is going to be a little bit more status quo. We'll have more data points to work with. New England, on the other hand, is just spending like it's burning a hole in their pockets for the first time in forever. And it feels like they're setting the table. Bill Belichick's getting up there in age a little bit. I have the Patriots trading up to 7. They're giving up their first round pick at 15, their third round selection at 96, and next year's first, along with cornerback Stephon Gilmore, who can hopefully give some mentorship to Jeff Okudah, the 2020 top 5 pick that Detroit had at corner, for New England to jump up and make this splash. They have the depth at corner to give Gilmore, and they've always been a team that will trade a player a year too early as compared to a year too late. And Stephon Gilmore, 2 years removed from being the defensive player of the year, is in a contract year, and he's at that magic age of 30 for cornerbacks where so often you see that drop-off start to happen.
Well, hopefully Justin Fields to New England, he'll have hopefully, a year or two behind Cam Newton to learn a thing or two. But now we're moving on to the New York Football Giants, who picked up a lot of great pieces over the past few weeks in the free agency. But where do you see them picking up here in your next 5 picks of the first round?
Dave Gettleman catches a lot of flack, and at times it's understandably so. At one point, they had like 8 defensive tackles on the roster, and Dave Gettleman loves his hog mollies and big uglies up front. But what the moves that they've done have really done a nice job in making a no excuses year for Daniel Jones, but B, the NFC East is wide open. Washington won it last year with 7 wins. So you look at the roster, and the most glaring need on the roster, in my opinion, is the outside pass rush. They brought back Leonard Williams on a monster deal, but somebody to rush the passer off the edge. And Azeez Ojulari from the University of Georgia had a great pro day showing. He kind of reminds me of Dante Fowler, who was a top 5 pick from the University of Florida. So he's got the momentum right now in an edge group that everybody's kind of has some questions, whether it's Kwity Paye in Michigan. Sack production's the question there. Jalen Phillips was at UCLA, medically retired, and then came back and had a really great year in 2020 with the Miami Hurricanes. Azeez Ojulari checks the most boxes, and he has a really good athletic profile that stands the test of time to be not on the board too long in these NFL drafts.
Now we're moving on to another team who has hit the jackpot in the free agency, the Miami Dolphins, here with me in Miami, Florida. I spy someone who has some chemistry with Tua that the Dolphins could really use on their offense. What were you thinking as you head into your next 5 picks?
Yeah, it may have hurt to not get Devontae Smith for the Dolphins and their chemistry and the game-winning throw in the national championship game, but Tua's best buddy, Najee Harris, in the offensive backfield. And I feel like you could make like a sitcom buddy cop duo with these two where they were like best friends at Alabama. And so Miami has a dire need at running back. And they last year, I don't want to say they got cute with running back, but they let the board fall to them with the running back position because they had all these picks in the top 60. And what ended up happening is they get on the board at 56, the top 5 backs are all gone. And they end up walking away with nobody. They trade for Matt Breida with the San Francisco 49ers in a deal that didn't really materialize. So I think Miami, Najee is the perfect stylistic fit for how Miami wants to play the game, which is very similar to Alabama, which makes sense because Tua is the quarterback there. They want to space you out, but they simultaneously also want to pound you in between the tackles and run the ball. Najee Harris has the ability to do that. And that chemistry, like you said, with Tua Tagovailoa made it a pick that made sense here at 18, even if positional value wasn't the best.
Now, Kyle, I know we're doing a lot of talk about offense, but a lot of teams are struggling this year. And the quarterback room is one of the main areas where we see the most struggle. And in Pittsburgh, they need help. We all know that. Big Ben needs help. He needs some assistance there.
So Pittsburgh kind of at a weird juncture where they've got a long tenured general manager. They have a long tenured, but also still very young head coach in Mike Tomlin, one of the best head coaches in all of football. And if we're being honest, the offense was held back a little bit by Ben Roethlisberger and his style of play in 2020 with everything was such quick hitting concepts. They really couldn't stretch the field and they had to rely on his savvy and expertise of eliminating sides of the field or routes or reads in the pre-snap in order to know when it was time to take a shot down the field. I have Mac Jones sliding outside the top 20. The big hurdles here are Washington, and they signed Ryan Fitzpatrick, and then Chicago. And Chicago was really flirting with Kenny Golladay. They have Allen Robinson back on the franchise tag. I have them drafting Rashad Bateman at 20. So if Pittsburgh gets to that point, Indianapolis, much like Minnesota, is one of those teams who always looks to trade back. They love collecting picks. Chris Ballard is one of the best GMs in all of football in Indianapolis. So there's an opportunity here for Pittsburgh to strike and make sure that none of these teams that maybe passed on a quarterback the first time through that are coming up at the beginning of the second round order get back into the first round and jump on Mac Jones. So I have an opportunity here for Pittsburgh to give up marginal picks. They give up a third and they give up a sixth to go up and get Mac Jones and move up 4 spots to make sure none of these other teams can trade out and have somebody jump them for Mac Jones to not necessarily help Ben Roethlisberger, but get the replacement that's going to help Mike Tomlin in the next, hopefully, 10 years of his era in Pittsburgh.
And now moving on to the end of your first round picks, there's a lot of defensive players left here. Who do you want to highlight as we close out round 1?
Yeah, I think it's interesting, and I'm glad you pointed that out because the top of the board is so offensively skewed. And we talked about some of the questions with some of the edge defenders, and you see Kwity Paye here, 26 to the Cleveland Browns. But the top of this draft is so offensively skewed that I think you're going to have a chance to get some really good defensive values this late in the game. One of those is Trevon Moehrig, the free safety from TCU. He's going to Baltimore at 27 in this mock. And Moehrig is the same style of player as what Earl Thomas was before the bottom fell out on that relationship with Baltimore and Thomas. And Thomas never even landed on his feet with another team. So for Baltimore's perspective, I know they have Chuck Clark. I know they have Deshaun Elliott, who didn't play bad, but it's not the same style of player. When you're a team that likes to blitz and play pressure as much and force balls to come out early, as much as the Baltimore Ravens have over the last couple of seasons, having the ball hawk in the middle of that defense can really, really help you be opportunistic, create turnovers, and clean up a lot of the mess. And Morey has the ball skills and he has the range to play that high post in this Baltimore defense.
Now, I know we've talked about a lot of the key players in round one, but there's still a lot of players that are rolling over into the second round that have the ceiling and the potential to start on a lot of these NFL rosters. Who are two players that you're highlighting as we step into the second round?
I would point first to pick 48. You talked about potential to step into the starting lineup, and the Las Vegas Raiders invested really heavily in 2020 into their linebacker room. They spent a handsome fortune for Corey Littleton to come in. They signed Nick Kwiatkowski. They traded for Raekwon McMillan. None of those guys really materialized in the way in which they would have hoped. So I have the Raiders drafting a very high upside inside linebacker in Jamin Davis from the University of Kentucky. If you know Tremaine Edmonds of the Buffalo Bills, he was the top 20 selection for them a few years back. I get similar vibes as far as his athletic profile and length and what he brings. Now, he only has 11 career starts, so it's all potential at this point in time. But Jamin Davis has the potential to be a high impact, 3-down Mike linebacker in the NFL. I think the Raiders would be well served to get him and let him play in space a little bit more earlier on in his career, so there's not so much processing that has to take place. But that was a fit that, as it fell into place, I really, really liked. And another one came later at pick 54 with the Indianapolis Colts drafting Spencer Brown from Northern Iowa. They have a vacancy at left tackle that they now need to fill. And Spencer Brown has the kind of athletic profile. He's very long, he's very smooth, and he's going to have the best guard in all of football, Quentin Nelson, playing to his right-hand side to make sure he's going to cover some of those mistakes for you while you learn on the job. But Spencer Brown, athletically speaking, physically speaking, mentally speaking, I think he's fairly ready to step into the NFL despite the fact that he played at Northern Iowa.
Now, I know a lot of people probably check out after the second round, but there's a lot of good players that are picked up in the third round too. A lot of guys that can really help with depth. A lot of teams struggle with that depth, especially once you reach the end of the season with injuries and, different things happening to teams. We've seen a lot of that, especially when you look at people's quarterback rooms and cornerbacks as well. Who do you see really just being a great addition to your roster down the stretch as we go into the third round?
Tamara, I'm glad anybody who checks out after round two, the middle rounds are the money rounds of the NFL draft. This is where you make your biggest impact because everybody's expecting impact players in the first round, right? But if you can draft good in those middle rounds and you can draft above average, that'll really help you set apart the depth of your roster. And one fit that I really, really like, he's a red hot name that came on late in the process, aided by a really good pro day, is Milton Williams, an interior defensive lineman, hybrid defensive lineman from Louisiana Tech. He at 284 pounds ran in the 4.6s. He had a 38-inch vertical leap. And you watch him on tape, he's got heavy, heavy hands. And you think about the Detroit Lions at pick 72, which is where I have him going, and the big speech from Dan Campbell about biting kneecaps and fall down 7 times, stand up 8. And Milton Williams, you watch him on tape and he plays with that kind of energy. And I'm like, man, Detroit just needs good football players in general. So this is a perfect opportunity for them to nail down somebody who he's not prototypical size because he's a little shorter in the arms, but he shows awareness with how to use his hands to deconstruct blocks and get off of bodies nonetheless. So he'll be here, I think, because of maybe that lack of ideal length for the position, but his athletic profile, the power in his hands, how explosive he is in linear situations when he could just come off the ball and drive forward. Really like that fit for Detroit. And another one that I like is Brady Christensen, left tackle from BYU. I have him going 88 to the Los Angeles Rams. And obviously the Rams have been relying on Andrew Whitworth to hold things down on the blind side. They've made this big change at quarterback, and you want to make sure you have depth on your offensive line. You want to make sure you're ready to go. And I think Brady Christensen, his athleticism and BYU's offensive infrastructure complements a lot of the things that Sean McVay's offense will do in the ground game that can make him not necessarily a universal prospect for every kind of offensive system, but going into that McVay offense and Brady Christensen, it's a fit. And that's where you see a lot of these hits in the money rounds, is guys who stylistically fit perfectly into a very specific role that they're going to be asked to do. And that's not always going to be the case. We say that all the time. Coaches put your players in position to have success. But Brady Christensen going to the Los Angeles Rams is an embodiment of that in my mock. And that's why he went at number 88 to the Rams.
Kyle, thank you so much for taking us through your latest mock draft 6.0. I'm so excited to see how this continues to change as we get ready for the draft. For more coverage coming up later this week and in weeks to come, please check out thedraftnetwork.com.